Good afternoon to everyone out there. I'm Barry Through, Executive Director of Gray Area, and it's my great privilege to welcome you all to the opening keynote conversation of Gray Area Festival 2021 Worlding Protocol. This is our 7th year of Gray Area Festival, and although we're all sad to not be able to hold our conference in person again this year, we are proud to be able to present an extraordinary lineup of artists, researchers, technologists online with free access to anyone thanks to the support of the National Endowment for the Arts. Of course, we can only continue to produce amazing programming like what you're going to experience this week with the support of you, our audience. And so if you are able to, please upgrade to a paying membership to help sustain this creative community we try and cultivate, as well as receive other benefits year round. And you can get in touch with us to talk about that. This festival couldn't happen without the tireless efforts of what I think is the hardest working arts team on the planet. So my deepest gratitude goes to Seabrook, Matt, Joy, Victoire, Tiffany, Nikki, Matt, Hannah, Nadav, all our other volunteers, and for making this happen. And to all the participants in this year's festival for showing up with extremely important and boundary-pushing work. Now I'd like to introduce the curator of this year's festival, Wade Wallerstein. Wade is founder of Silicon Ballet and co-director of Transfer Gallery that's been supporting digital arts and technology for years. He's extremely knowledgeable and supporting of arts and culture, and I can't speak highly enough of the program he's put together for us all this year, which hopefully we can now hear some more about.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for the warm welcome, Barry. I'm really excited to be here with everyone today. This is the first day of the Gray Area Festival Worlding Protocol program. And as Barry said, this show is really a labor of love from the whole community who came together around this idea of world building. Before I begin, I want to make a few acknowledgements. First and foremost, we at Gray Area acknowledge that we are located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that as the original stewards of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with nature for millennia, and we honor the Ohlone peoples for their enduring commitment to Mother Earth. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. So with that said, what is Worlding Protocol all about? Worlding is a mode of interdependent interspecies planetary perception, and protocol are the computational infrastructures that organize our mediated experience. As our species takes stock from a still uncontained global pandemic, it's clear that the entangled web of ecological, economic, and social crises that we face demands planetary scale cooperation. Even with the promise of new technologies enabling real-time simulation, distributed financial systems, and geoengineering, exclusionary and extractive power structures persist, rendering purely technical solutions ineffective. Anything is possible, yet nothing really seems to change. For the 7th edition of Gray Area Festival, we present Worlding Protocol, a survey of interdisciplinary creators drawing upon indigenous knowledge, transhumanist philosophies, regenerative ecologies, and autonomous organizations to imagine new relational ontologies beyond utopian and fatalist worldviews. How do we negotiate the balance between our individual freedom and communal dependencies? And what practical reality can we all build together? There is such an inspiring lineup of thinkers and creators who have taken a leap with us to explore what a new Worlding Protocol might look like. And I really hope you'll stick around all week for contributions from Benjamin Bratton and Audrey Tang, Shu Li Chang, Wendy Chen, Cheyenne Concepcion, Jeremy Couillard, A.M. Dark, Dawn XYZ, Oria Harvey, Joey Holder, Kia Kreutler, Hisu Kwan, Lajane McMillan, Vernell A.A. Noel, Chiare Ribot, Nathan Schaefer, Skawanati, Sister Lady Bianca, Thenmozi Soundarajan, Sammy Veeler, Mackenzie Wark, Peter Wu, and Chan Chan Yi. I'm also really excited to share that we have 3 performances by Valencia James, Kaken, and Huntress over the course of the festival. For more info, and if you want to check out the full lineup, head to grayareafestival.io. Later this week, I'm going to be joined by two of my favorite curators, Doreen Rios and Julia Greenway, who will help me moderate a series of talks and discussions with all of the Gray Area participants. And finally, I'm going to note that as part of the festival, we have curated an immersive virtual exhibition in New Art City. The show is titled Diorama, and each of the artist contributions is housed within a virtual architecture designed by New Art City Gallery director Sammy Wheeler, where portals to artist-created worlds are posed in neat dioramas. This show works by replicating the diorama exhibiting technique employed by museums for centuries. Diorama's installation offers a new phenomenology that critiques and expands upon the material limitations and affordances of web-ready simulated exhibition formats. Underwater caves, balmy coastlines, warped starfields, cyberpunk cityscapes, and more converge in a kaleidoscopic panorama of what is and isn't possible. That was super long-winded, so thank you all very much for being here. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Barry.
Thank you, Wade. We'll go now right into our opening keynote conversation. I just needed to note briefly that during the very end, we had some technical problems that caused Benjamin Bratton to drop off. So we didn't quite get to close it up with a neat bow, but it was a long and very compelling, conversation that deals with a wide range of topics. So that's kind of what's going on at the end, but I think we'll all find it extremely valuable in its entirety. So here we go. Hello, I'm Barry Through, Executive Director at Gray Area, and on behalf of everyone at Gray Area, I would like to welcome you to this opening keynote conversation for Gray Area Festival 2021 Worlding Protocol. This discussion between Benjamin Bratton and Audrey Tang was held on October 6th. It builds off the themes in Bratton's new book, The Revenge of the Real, which envisions a new positive biopolitics that recognizes that governance is literally a matter of life and death. We are grappling with multiple interconnected dilemmas: climate change, pandemics, and the tensions between the individual and society, all of which have to be addressed on a planetary scale. COVID-19 exposed the pre-existing conditions of the current global crisis. Many Western states failed to protect their populations, while others were able to suppress the virus only with sweeping social restrictions. In contrast, many Asian countries were able to make much more precise interventions. Everywhere, lockdowns transformed everyday life, introducing an epidemiological view of society based on sensing, modeling, and filtering. The book asks, what lessons are there to be learned? Benjamin Bratton's work spans philosophy, architecture, computer science, and geopolitics. He is professor of visual arts at the University of California, San Diego. He is program director of the Terraforming and New Normal programs at Strelka Institute. He is also a professor of digital design at the European Graduate School and visiting professor at SciArc and NYU Shanghai. In addition to The Revenge of the Real, he's author of The Stack on Software and Sovereignty. Audrey Tang is a Taiwanese free software programmer and digital minister of Taiwan, who has been described as one of the 10 greatest Taiwanese computing personalities. In August 2016, Tang was invited to join Taiwan's Executive Yuan as Minister without Portfolio, making her the first transgender and first non-binary official in the top executive cabinet. Tang is a community leader of Haskell and Perl and a core member of GovZero. Please enjoy the discussion. Thank you for being here for this conversation today. I think if we want to start talking about technology, infrastructure, and biopolitics today, it seems hard not to start with Facebook, which is, of course, a company that operates like a nation state with they just said 2.8 billion monthly active users as of second quarter of this year, and a bigger economy than a lot of nations, and which is synonymous with its own technology stack. And it faced sort of dual national security issues recently, with a bunch of leaks that described how aware it is of its own, psychological and political damage that its products have on their users. and also a network outage, which brought down its services for itself and all of its subsidiary services like Instagram and WhatsApp. So, Mr. Tang, maybe we can start with you. And as someone who's you worked really hard to on commons and open source and keeping digital infrastructures in the commons. I'm wondering if you have any perspective on what we can, what we should take away from the recent Facebook activity.
Well, in Taiwan, since we invested quite heavily in the civic infrastructure in the digital realm for the past few years, so I would say that our e-petitioning, our deliberative digital democracy stuff was not impacted during the hours that Facebook went down. Well, partly because it's during our midnight, but still. And also, I would say that because people recognize that in order to have a politically binding effect, there's the digital equivalent of town halls, of museums, university campuses, and so on, where a civilized conversation can be held. And people go to Facebook, of course. Taiwan has probably more Facebook accounts than population, but they go there for entertainment. It's just like we will never hold a town hall in a smoke-filled nightclub with private bouncers intoxicating drinks. People have to shout to get heard and things like that. There's, with all due respect, a place for the entertainment sector, but it's not for public discussion.
Yeah, I'm calling in from California, where Facebook is located, and we haven't invested in our civic digital infrastructure in the same way. Not to say that a digital infrastructure that plays the part or pretends to be a kind of public realm has not received investment. Obviously, it's received quite a lot of investment, and we built this out built that out in this regard. I say we the Californians with some trepidation, I suppose. I suppose I'll come at it from a different angle, from Barry's question about Facebook as a kind of a platform that operates at a transnational scale, to some extent operating above or below state jurisdiction in how it is its formal and de facto sovereignty might operate. And to some extent, I guess in this regard, I see it as indicative of a sort of larger macro trend, sort of perhaps in terms of the direction in which digital platforms might go in both a good way and a bad way, in a both sort of positive or potentially negative light, or at least directions that could go in either directions. I think quite clearly, though, I should say that I think that in a way, Facebook as an example is fundamentally broken. It was fundamentally broken at the beginning, that its model of a society is one in which society is understood as liberal individual users, separate, atomized, and then society is then understood as simply the multiplication and aggregation of these atomic individuals with wants and needs, and this curious image of a kind of a privatized individual data. I don't think this is not the model of society that we understand from anthropology, sociology. It's not how societies work. And so I think to a certain extent, there's a way in which the contraption of Facebook is sort of destined to fall apart in other kinds of ways based on this fundamental misapprehension. But I guess one of the things that I'm still interested to a certain extent around this, and would certainly appreciate Audrey's insight on this, is to the extent to which Facebook is a transnational platform. It wasn't produced by a single nation state, essentially. It operates across boundaries, national boundaries, in different kinds of ways. And one of the ways in which we have seen more positive versions of investment in civic infrastructure has been on, let's say, a municipal level, one city building kinds of things, or occasionally, in your case, at this level of a state, of a nation state that is able to do this. In other words, that the public that invests in it, that would build from it, that would benefit from it, is a public with a pretty old-fashioned kind of jurisdiction built into it, the citizens of this place or that place. And I wonder, wondering aloud, in a certain sense, if there are ways of thinking about digital civic infrastructures that are transnational, that are not bound to one particular jurisdiction, but that have the same kind of that have a cosmopolitan vision at the scale or scope of Facebook, but with a vision of what a society is and what a society should be, that is considerably less pathological than the one that our friends in Menlo Park have given us.
Well, the digital public infrastructures that I had in mind, especially when Facebook went down, that's very active in Taiwan, say the PTT, which is sometimes compared to Reddit, but really there's not much in common, right? PTT is GPLv3, it's free software as in freedom, collaboratively governed, and it's been running under academic network subsidy for 25 years now. And it's a global forum. I mean, mostly the conversation centers around Taiwan politics and whatever other public issues, but the contributors come from all sorts of different jurisdictions. And PTT only insists that you can authenticate yourself by paying $1 Taiwan to its bank account, which it promptly refunds, but it doesn't quite care where you are, like in the physical plane. So I would say that most of our conversations takes place on forums that doesn't really care about citizenship. Our participatory budgeting, our citizens initiative is maybe not called a citizen initiative. Residents and people who anyway can authenticate using the SMS are all free to participate. So all those different tools which are open source are swiftly then adapted in other parts of the world, and because they are federated in nature in the kind of source code contributions and so on, so we immediately gain kind of, in my mind, it's more like a link graph, not a place graph of people of similar values that binds together toward this kind of digital commons or re-decentralized commons.
Thank you. As you know, I've just recently published a book about the pandemic called Revenge of the Real on post-pandemic politics. And one of the arguments that the book makes is that and maybe this to some extent is part of the experience of the pandemic here from California, is that we can understand and read the pandemic as a kind of crisis of governance, particularly in the West. That we have these wealthy, technologically sophisticated societies that found themselves politically and indeed culturally unable to respond as effectively as really that they should have. And obviously, in particular, a lot of populist administrations really did the worst, globally speaking, not just Trump, but also Bolsonaro and Modi and Johnson and the rest of this. And many have interpreted this as a kind of bad sign for democracy. And one of the things that I also was a bit troubled by was the way in which the response of East Asian democracies, that in many cases, and your work being exemplary of this, were far more effective in many ways, but I think really misunderstood in the West, and they're understood as being somehow more authoritarian or even totalitarian than and I'm sure this is based on all kinds of ignorance and misunderstandings around this as well. But I just wanted to ask, as someone who was intimately involved in Taiwan's comparatively successful response, what do you take as the key lessons to be taken from the pandemic more generally in terms of, let's say, the future of governance more broadly? If we were to take the pandemic as a kind of test run for many of the challenges that we'll face going forward, what really should we make sure that we've learned from this experience?
Sure. Yeah, we've never had a lockdown, so I don't think there's anything totalitarian about the Taiwanese
Yes.
playbook. So yeah, and we're speaking now for I think 5 days now, 6 days, with no local community cases. So if we're not post-pandemic, we're probably postponed the pandemic. Now the key to achieve this, I believe, is to maximize trust in the citizens, or as I prefer to call it, the social sector. And indeed, the term social sector didn't gain popularity in Taiwan until around the turn of century, a really large earthquake that mobilized the previously unconnected faith systems, social entrepreneurs, charities, and so on, that are more municipal or local based. But because they had to respond to this sudden disaster of earthquake together around the turn of century, so they formed this adhocracy, if you will, that very effectively disseminates knowledge in a culturally sensitive way, adapting it to the local knowledge and wisdom. And so even during the earthquake, when the municipal governments publish simply not very accurate numbers, the large charities and so on, they publish numbers that are far more trusted. And this continues to this day. Like whenever during a disaster, when a Tzu Chi charity publish a number, they automatically gain more legitimacy than any municipal government or even central government. So the point here is that the digital infrastructure is here to connect the social sector. It's not to automate away the social sector. When I explained that during the pandemic last year, there's more than 2 million calls to this toll-free number 1922, where anyone can place a call and get their questions answered. And so when people were surprised that they don't go to a voicemail ever, and they were picked up by either professional call center operators or volunteers from the Tzu Chi, from the social sector. And for example, when a young boy called saying last April, hey, you're rationing out mask, which is great, but all I got was pink ones, which is not great. And all the boys in my class have navy blue masks. I don't want to wear pink to school. Well, the very next day in the 2 p.m. CECC, Central Epidemic Command Center press conference, all the medical officers wore pink masks. And Minister Chen, the commander, even said that Pink Panther was his childhood hero or something. So basically, the boy became the most hit boy overnight because only he has the color that the heroes wear, and the hero's hero wear. So I would say this is about trusting the citizens with this kind of message in real time. Imagine if the Minister Chen took like 60 days to respond, then of course we would not have this chance of not just gender mainstreaming, but also making mask a fashion statement. The pink mask was very trending for quite a while, and then rainbow mask and whatever.
Mm-hmm. So it's a dynamic between a kind of citizen-centric and decentralized sort of kind of infrastructure that you describe here, which is very different, as I suggest, than the ways in which I think the Taiwan's response, or East Asia's response in general, has been understood in the West. I think part of the crisis, part of there was the crisis of governance, and then there was the sort of refusal to learn from the crisis of governance. And I think part of the refusal to learn was to actually understand what other people were doing. You know, if this was a sort of big experiment in comparative governance, and Italy wasn't doing very well early on, Texas wasn't doing, Florida, whatever, that the ability to actually learn what works has not been taken up. And this is I guess the thing that I find, you know, even more a little bit more disturbing in this regard. And specifically, it has had to do with, as suggested, this question of the role of technology as a form of social infrastructure, even as epidemiological technology. And just to say, and asking for your comment, in the West, this discussion fell into sort of two camps, is the way I would sort of take it, two kinds of extremes. Like either on the one hand, there was a kind of evangelical enthusiasm for the adoption of whatever we have at hand as quickly as possible, phone tracking apps or whatever, and that this would in essence, as you suggested, automate the social sector. Like we don't need the social sector because this will be solved with the app. Or on the other hand, maybe a kind of, and this goes to your question of trust, I think quite clearly, that a sense that any form of epidemiological sensing and the way in which society might know what's going on within itself is a slippery slope to some kind of biomedical totalitarianism or something, and so must be resisted on all terms. And so participation is resisted. Participation is not only not entered into, but it's actively that is actively refused and resisted in one sense around this as well. And so I wonder, just for those who are viewing, who are watching, saying, if you could explain a little bit, recount a little bit for us your role in the development of Taiwan's own response, and maybe comment a little bit on how different the logic of how to respond and even what the problem might be than the characterization I've laid out, if you think it's appropriate.
Sure. I'll just use one example from this May, from this tweet from Tim Colpin that started with OMG exclamation mark. And that's when we introduce what we call 1922 SMS-based QR code scanning contact tracing technology. And so it works like this. If you have an iPhone, say, in your lock screen, if you swipe without unlocking, you get into this camera mode. And once you point it to this QR code, it sends a message, and then you click send, and that's it. Like, this is literally in 2 seconds how one in Taiwan checks into public venues during the height of our real first wave, the only wave in May. And there's quite a few nuances here. First of all, 1922 is already a trusted telephone number. It's toll-free. It doesn't cost you anything to send an SMS. We explain very clearly that this random code is rotated out, deleted after 28 days. And most crucially, it doesn't go to the government. And it doesn't go to any multinational company that also happens to sell advertisement. It's kind of a sticky note in your telecom provider. So whichever telecom carrier you choose, they're going to store it for 28 days and then delete it. So in the more than 250 million messages sent since May, since we introduced it, only around 1 million gets accessed by professional contact tracers. And each and every individual can look at the auditing records of who exactly accessed those records for the past 28 days at any time on a public website. And this entire design is not government technology. It's co-created by a community of practitioners that's care very much about privacy enhancing techniques and so on. The civic technologists called themselves G0 or G0V. And so they insist that each and every SMS here have to attach this note that says for epidemic control only. And so when a whistleblower, a judge that said, hey, somebody wiretapping a major fraud crime, the police accidentally look at this and want to use it for investigation, there was a huge backlash. And then within a couple of weeks, we interpreted saying, no, this is not communication because you're not talking to a real human. When you're sending this SMS, the vast majority of which just got deleted after 28 days, it's just like pinning a note to yourself. So it should not be wiretapped. And after that, it's not wiretapped. So a real-time feedback system like this, I believe, is a good alternative, really the only alternative to over-centralization in the state and over-centralization in multinational companies.
In your sense, how you would characterize the difference between the way in which Taiwan dealt with this? I mean, it's sort of at a big picture level. Between Taiwan dealt with this and the ways in which it was dealt with in other areas, either right next door in PRC or anywhere else that you're sort of familiar with. Because as you mentioned, you're not in lockdown. You haven't been in lockdown. I mean, people are amazed to know that right next door to China, where the outbreak began, like Taiwan's never locked down. Schools stayed open. It was this. All of this was in a way unnecessary. Like, we could have done this better. And I wonder, from your sense, like where you see the sort of the patterns of difference and what you attribute it to.
Yeah, on the highest level, as I said, it's about trusting citizens maximally. And in a slightly more tactical level, I'd say we're faster, more fair, and more fun. So basically, the idea of fast, fair, fun as the kind of three pillars of social innovation really allows our clarifications, our scientific response, our rational deliberation and discussions to have a higher basic reproduction value than conspiracy theories, so that we don't suffer from the revenge of the imaginary, right? So the idea here is that when people find it more fun, more participatory to remix cute dog memes about using masks to protect one's own face against one's own unwashed hand, and so on, then all those anxiety, all those kind of suppressed outrage and so on go to a creative, almost comedic, artistic outlet that then spreads the science faster than the conspiracy theories and disinformation.
Interesting. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I have more to ask, but I'd like to not. I would not be the only.
Sure. We call this humor over rumor, by the way, which is quite poetic.
Humor over rumor. That's the sentence. Yeah.
That's right.
We need more. We need more of this, I think.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting about the, as a kind of gray area as an arts organization, we deal with this kind, creativity and how art and, I count memes as part of that, can be part of this dialogue and have kind of functional roles and, actual things going on in the world. I wonder, clearly there are also memes in the United States, is there any, and I would say that that this idea of like trusting the citizen is pretty interesting and almost seems like it wouldn't apply here in the same way. So I'm wondering if maybe in what ways can we dig into that? Because, so for example, on the state level, what was done to, if anything, was done to encourage that kind of meme activity or direct it in the ways that you wanted it to go? Because one assumes that there could also be a lot of memes out there that were at odds with what the government would hope the response of the citizenry would be, which is certainly the case here.
But that's entirely fine. All of our public communication materials are under Creative Commons, which already says that you can reproduce it in the wrong context. Really, there is no wrong context. And I would argue that the people who want to manufacture disinformation wouldn't care about your copyright notice anyway. So it's like the old crypto was, right? If you outlaw crypto, only the criminal have crypto. And so the same goes for the cultural commons. If we put everything in the commons, certainly people who want to make disinformation will use them, but it also empowers anyone really who like cute dogs and so on to remix. And by and large, I think the more artful, co-creative, pro-social use of social media eventually triumphs over this more anti-social use of social media. But if you limit via copyright and threaten to sue and things like that, or the legitimate remixers, then what ends up is the people who are operating extra-jurisdictionally and don't care about your laws anyway.
Was there any kind of problem with misinformation or disinformation within in terms of the public discussion? And I wonder whether that was more at the beginning, at the end, and what was it about, and how was it dealt with?
Yeah, we countered the pandemic with no lockdowns, and so we also countered the infodemic with no takedowns. And I would also say that our counter-pandemic playbook is really a re-application of the principles that our counter-infodemic playbook, which we made in around 2018-19, which kind of exactly led to the pandemic times. And the ideas of fast, fair, fun applies doubly to countering the infodemic, because if you don't respond within 60 minutes of a trending disinformation, then all hope is lost, right? It's already made it into the public consciousness. And so starting 2018-19, all the ministries in Taiwan are required to have this 222 principle, right, within 2 hours, on average 60 minutes. at least 2 funny pictures, and each carrying less than 200 characters. And that's kind of the counter meme. And we work with participation officers, people who are themselves comedians or work closely with professional comedians on such messaging. So this is one early example before the pandemic. There was a popular misinformation that said the state is going to fine you 1 million NT dollars for perming your hair multiple times a week. And then within a couple of hours, actually less than 60 minutes, this meme appeared from the premier's office, head of the cabinet, that says it's not true. And then with a younger version of the head of cabinet who said, I may be bald now, but I still used to have hair and I would not punish people with hair. And a fine print that says, what we've introduced really is a labeling requirement for hair products. And then a hair dryer with the premier as it looks now that says, however, if you perm your hair many times a week, you will not damage your bank account, but it would damage your hair. And just look at me now for what will happen to your hair. Now this is quite humorous. This obviously had a higher basic reproduction rate, and people who laughed about it kind of laughed it off. So there's no kind of outrage turned into vengefulness, discrimination, and so on left. For them. So we call it vaccination of the mind. Once people laughed and shared this meme, the original rumor has no potency anymore within kind of the mimetic replicating potential. But of course, the comedians can only focus on a few things at a time every day. So what we rely on is like people voluntarily flagging incoming email as spam and sending to spam house. So the spammer's next email lands to the junk mail box, not the inbox. And so we've got the leading Trend Micro, our antivirus company. The G0V community has this Kofax bot and so on that you can't just forward end-to-end encrypted. It's like Signal or WhatsApp. In Taiwan, it's called Line. You can forward suspected misinformation to this bot, which then offers real-time clarification via a crowdsourced wiki-like editing process and vetted by the professional journalists in the Taiwan Fact Check Center. And the beauty of this is none of this is state-operated. Right, it's firmly, squarely within the social sector, like Spam House is. So we basically use the counter spam playbook to counter disinformation, and later on, this proved to be essential in spreading the mimetic messages about science. And we even convinced our vice president, Dr. Chen Jianren, to record some of the massive online courses that then went viral. He's not just our vice president, also author of the epidemiology textbook, Authority on Epidemiology.
So let me clarify then. So you were saying that the ministries themselves follow the 3 Fs strategy. We're able to respond. An example that you showed was a response by one of the ministries within 20 minutes. But it's not a you wouldn't characterize this as a government as a state initiative, but rather if I understand it, a social sector initiative in your terms, in which the state is participating.
Because we cannot take anything down. We're just participating as a creator, right? As a fellow creator. We do not enjoy privilege over other creators. And the power of the state manufactured memes is not in the state channels themselves, but rather in the remixers that then take the meme and spread it to their local community.
But in what way did the state sponsor these? Did the state pay for the infrastructure at all, or help organize the building of it, or help pay or organize the creatives that made the memes? Like in what way was the support done from the state level?
Yeah, the International Fact-Checking Network has strict rules when it comes to party or state donation. So we're not funding any of the infrastructure level work. Similarly, the Kofax project from the GovZero project doesn't have any state funding and so on. And Trend Micro is a large enough antivirus company, probably doesn't need state funding anyway. So there is a ecosystem. Although full disclosure, because Trend Micro's team won an award for international counter-disinformation organized by your state department. So in a sense, it received state funding in the form of a trophy, a prize or something. In any case, what I'm trying to say is that the ministries and their comedians, they are, of course, paid, funded. The preservation officers are career public servants. It's part of their job. but it's the part of their job to engage the commons with the rule of the commons, amplifying the commons. This is what I call a people-public-private partnership. That is to say, the people set the norms, just like the norms around QR-based contact tracing, saying no to aggregated data storage to the state or to multinational companies. And what we did is just to engage them on their rules, and then turning around, convincing the private sector to implement the norms already set by the social sector, and convincing non-domestic players in the private sector like Facebook, saying that they have also to comply with the, say, the honest advertisement during our election period, or the social and political advertisements need to publish in real time their funding sources and things like that. Well, that's because that's the social sector's demand, and they occupied the parliament literally to fight for this, and this is the norm here, and the PTT has already implemented that. So Facebook really, the kind of trade negotiation with Facebook is not that we'll pass a law to ban you, we've never done that, but rather you may face social sanction if you go against the social norm.
And what kind of sanction might that be?
Well, for example, people who boycott Facebook for not publishing the extra-jurisdictionally sponsored advertisement, people who boycott posting advertisement there until such a day that for relevance. And I think in 2019, Taiwan is one, if not the first jurisdiction where Facebook just caved in and say, okay, let's just publish like Taiwan's Control Yuan National Auditing Office, all the extra-jurisdictionally and even domestic advertisement during the election season.
Interesting. So I wanted to ask you a little more on the people, public and private dynamic here as well. I wonder if you could articulate for us in your terms why it's so important that the state is not involved in these initiatives for what might, it seems like, the governance of the public realm, from the way in which, for example, many of the Western European countries dealt with it. The social norm, to a certain extent, was a presumption that the role of the state is to have some kind of conducting role in this as well. And I wonder if you could talk a little, obviously across the strait in DRC as well, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why it's important that the state is only one player, not sort of the supervisor, so to speak.
Yeah, because we are a pluralistic democracy, and there's multiple different ways that state can play its part. But especially during elections, if we control the fact-checking, then we would not have the effective response for countering this particular form of disinformation, which, and I quote, said the CIA made 2 special invisible inks for ballots. So you vote for one of the 3 presidential candidates, your vote will disappear, and Dr. Tsai Ing-wen's vote will appear, and so on. It was one of the more popular trending disinformation during our election day, something that advanced democracy like the US never had anyway. So what we did, though, in Taiwan is that instead of the state pushing any particular form of propaganda or clarification, we simply radically opened the counting process. Taiwan has only paper-based voting and only in-person paper-based voting. There's no advance or mail-in voting. So people, after they voted, they remain. And we open up for live streaming and for recording all the counting processes and each and every of the counting booths. And each of the major parties have their own apps of real-time tallying. And YouTubers made it kind of their job, right, to stream the otherwise boring counting process. And so whenever a YouTuber live streams from a counting ballot station, there's a way to very quickly go back to the recordings of the disputed places and so on via the political party sponsored apps. And there's quite a few of those YouTubers. And when all of those YouTubers of different political parties agree in their counts, no matter which political party affiliation you're in, you'll probably trust their numbers and their entertaining reporting more than this trending disinformation. So again, this is about notice and then put out a public notice that's participatory. It's not about taking down anything in particular. But imagine if the state funds this infrastructure, then it will be kind of working in paradox with each other, because Dr. Tang is campaigning for the second term. So basically, she has a kind of paradoxical relation with this kind of digital public infrastructure if this infrastructure is paid by the state government.
I wonder if I could ask you then what, I mean, you're minister, you're in a sense, you're both part of the social sector and the state sector in this regard. You're all three Ps in a certain sort of way as well.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you see? I mean, how would you characterize, in a the proper role of digital civic infrastructure that is funded and deployed and administered by the state? There's all manner of different discussions about the way in which the sensing and modeling and comprehension of what is going on in a society and how a society is functioning and how it sort of work, and long-term planning, and sort of the long-term foresight that more ad hoc groups are not necessarily well structured to deal with the kinds of things we sort of lean on states to do. What do you see as the proper, as how do I put this? As the fundamental infrastructure upon which all complex societies depend becomes increasingly computational. Where do you see the proper role then for the parts of this transformation that are appropriately state-driven or state-administered or state-participatory versus those that really should stay on the people side of this, or in terms of the norm setting and in terms of the long-term planning?
Yeah, I mean, the state still, for the moment, is the main producer of regulations and laws, whereas the social sector is the producer of habits and norms. So a norm-first approach says that the state should only play an amplifying role. It should not create the data collection points that wasn't part of the norm to begin with, in the name of the pandemic. That's perhaps one of the most important heuristics during the entire pandemic that Taiwan's model implies. Because if we invent new data collection touchpoints that are simply not there, nothing like that existed before during the pre-pandemic times, then the cybersecurity parameters, the privacy parameters are completely unknown. And the state is basically saying, trust us without trusting the citizens, right? And that's a big no-no, because then people have all sorts of ways to fuel the conspiracy theories, because otherwise the state should have thought about this before. So in a sense, because we've never declared a state of emergency in Taiwan during this pandemic, everything we did need to be part of the already Parliament-approved, publicly debated, pre-approved norm-based use of technology, which is why we rely so much on the national healthcare system, on the SMS system, and so on. Not because they're the best fit, but because people already put trust in those fundamental infrastructure that's been around since the previous coronavirus, since 2003, right? So the point here is that this complementarity to existing social sector infrastructures is where we're pouring our budget and our efforts in. Just like when we're doing broadband as a human right, we're not saying that everybody have to use, low Earth orbit satellite links or whatever, but we use the existing infrastructure already there in the more rural areas and remote islands and so on. But we commit ourselves saying there will be, and there was sufficient funding out from 5G spectrum auction and things like that to make sure that at any point in Taiwan, even 4,000 meters high, you're guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second. Otherwise, it's my fault, like personally. So I think that is the role that they should play.
I see. And this is quite obviously quite different than the role of the state has played across the strait in PRC. And I can't bypass the opportunity to speak with you I can't pass the opportunity to ask you to comment a little bit on what you see as the comparative successes and failures of the way in which the mainland dealt with this phenomenon. It's obviously extraordinarily different, but I wonder how you would characterize it.
Yeah, when December 31st, when Dr. Li Wenliang's message on the 2019's last day, literally, spread to PTT, the civic infrastructure in Taiwan. I think it also made ways to other parts of social media because our ones are more pro-social, I guess. We're the only jurisdiction in which Dr. Li Wenliang's message, the 7 SARS cases in the Huanan seafood market, actually made a policy impact, right? We started health inspections for all flight passengers coming in from Wuhan the very next day, the first day of 2020. And that's because the triaging of the contributors on PTT in a decidedly pro-social manner on this whistleblowing message. Now, compared to people in Wuhan, who literally has no way to have access to this message because of the lack of journalistic freedom, because Dr. Li Wenliang himself was censored by the police station, no less. And so I guess all the kind of sudden lockdowns, all those very top-down, shutdown, takedown infrastructures that the PRC has built also reinforce itself, because without a thriving collective intelligence, journalism, and the social sector, there really is no way to know what's going on. And then when you want to put epidemic control to a situation where you literally don't know what's going on, then really the only recourse is to go to this more top-down, takedown, shutdown route. But Taiwan was able to choose a different route, not only because nobody wants to go back to the SARS lockdown in 2003, but also because we had a choice, because we have this collective intelligence that can inform us quite with the wisdom of the crowd, what's actually going on and what should we do. So in summary, I believe that the collective intelligence, that's the PTT, acted on the SARS 7 cases in Huanan seafood market warning around the turn from 2018 to 2020, the first day of 2020, because Dr. Li Wenliang's message literally saved Taiwanese people. We started health inspection for all flight passengers coming in from Wuhan because it was triage on the pro-social civic infrastructure. But in the PRC, where people have literally no way to get Dr. Li Wenliang's message because it was censored, there was no other choice. When you know nothing about what's really going on, then your only recourse is probably just top down, take down, shut down, whatever. And so I think Taiwan benefits from being a liberal democracy, a pluralistic democracy, because we not only know what's going on thanks to the civic journalists, but also we know what should we do thanks to the civic scientists.
I wonder if we want to talk about surveillance and tracking a little bit, which is a prominent part of the book, or I think sort of the sensing layer of the stack, as you talk about it, Ben. And, you know, we kind of had a couple of responses in the U.S. One is that phone and tracking technology was going to save everything. You know, there was a Californian state app that I remember being developed, and we had like Google and Apple sharing data to try and have a tracking response. And then, of course, there's an anti-surveillance response that's kind of a, big data, don't track everybody, or it's going to be, you're going to have all sorts of dystopian outcomes. Wondering from your perspective in Taiwan, what were the uses of sort of surveillance and tracking, and how is that messaged and accepted by the citizenry to keep from having the worst kind of responses to it?
Mm-hmm. But I wonder if I could clarify just the point.
Yeah,
one moment.
Yes.
Just as well was simply that I think a lot of it comes down to just sort of the definition of what do we mean by surveillance in this regard, and it was really more of a critique to a certain extent of a rather, I think, blunt and overly simplistic connotation of that term, either in sort of pro or con. And in that sense, and one of the problems that we, as Barry, as you know, in California was undersensing, that people couldn't get tested, that our healthcare system is not inclusive, it's not equitable, and part of the reason we, as Audrey was saying, you know what's going on so you can act. We didn't know what was going on. we were not able to test people, and so we were not able to develop, granular epidemiological models, and so specific intervention was impossible. And so, as they were saying, when you don't know what's going on, you're left with no choice but to assume it's everywhere and shut everything down. And so, I think my point was less, okay, surveillance is good, but rather that this discourse around surveillance as such in a way, has contributed to a situation where collective intelligence is almost impossible and much more difficult than it should be, and we need a different conversation. That was really the point to be made. So with that, I'll pass along.
Yeah, and I would describe Taiwan's participatory self-surveillance thing as Steve Munn's old word, surveillance, right? Kind of watching from under, from the bottom, not watching from this sky net thing, right? So what I'm trying to say is that surveillance or participatory self-surveillance is crucially important in a surveillance system, that this entire thing is radically transparent and easy to understand. So when we introduced the real contact tracing system last year, this is about venues putting kind of a piece of paper where anyone doesn't need to fill in their real name, just a handle, and a way for them to be contacted, like an email address, which could be a proton mail or a private relay, or whatever, or a phone number that could be a telephone number in the landline or mobile. So the point here is that people entrust the venue with this minimal contact numbers, and the venue never have to submit it to the government or to any other company. Actually, they shred it after 28 days of no local confirmed cases, which is most of last year. And so the point here is that even in the nightclubs, even in the host and hostess bars that remain operating for most of last year, they're okay with this because it's in their best interest to keep the privacy, the private details of their patrons. And the patrons, well, the venues already know them anyway. So this information is not going anywhere until if this venue is shut down because of a local outbreak in that very venue. And otherwise, this information is not going anywhere. So the SMS-based contact tracing just extends this idea and take the telecom operators as kind of the venue. And it's not compulsory. So you can always just go back. And people innovated there too, right? People carried small kind of name cards that are pseudonymous. People applied this kind of ink stamp and so on, especially for people with no phones whatsoever. And that's still a preferred way to enter into venues if you don't like to use a phone. And even if you have a feature phone, like smartphone, you just text the 15 digits that I just showed in your built-in text SMS function of the feature phone to 1922, a trusted number. Again, that completes the check-in. So because it's so transparent and so easy to understand, people form their own decisions on whether they want to be informed when there's a local outbreak or not, or they go back to the paper-based method, which is completely fine.
And what is the response when there is an outbreak? What is at an institutional level among the three Ps? What happens when there is an outbreak in terms of the carrier? Is what the role of the carrier, the role of the state or any other the health administration? Like, what is the sequence of sort of chain of responsibility to make an intervention of some kind?
The municipal contact tracers, the city contact tracers, usually employed by the local health bureau, initiates the contact tracing and interview process. So they physically go to the venue to collect the paper records. And they also, of course, ask the 5 major telecoms of the SMS check-in trail. But those check-in trails doesn't come with location information. These are just 15-digit random code, right? So they have to also make a separate inquiry to the QR code maker, then to complete the picture. So in information science terms, this is a multi-party computation, meaning that none of the 3 or 4 parties have the complete picture of the person's whereabouts. And without the other parties' collaboration, well, there really simply is no surveillance market capitalism value of the shard of information that one holds. It just looked like gibberish, right? So, but when the by law authorized contact tracer get hold of this information and piece them together, instead of in other jurisdictions where it takes on average 24 hours to get this picture together, let alone the interviews and quarantine. In Taiwan, all this process takes less than 24 minutes.
24 minutes. How so? I mean, after they physically go and get this, you said you pick this up.
Yeah.
Then this aggregation process is
it's completely automatic, right? So there is a contact tracer assistance platform, and they just fill in those details there. And then it pieces together the multi-party inputs and then shows via a map a complete picture of the overlapping path and trails and suggested contacts. And with a click of a button, one can then get a telephone or contact or email of everyone who intersected, who checked in on the same venue right after or sometimes after, depending on airborne transmission of this confirmed case. And then all of these people are then notified and quarantined in place or things like that.
I see. And the quarantine is voluntary? I'm curious on this. Or is there some measure of
the place of the quarantine is you can choose, right? A quarantine hotel, a quarantine center, and things like that. But the quarantine itself, the 14 days, is compulsory, and we pay you around $100 a day for your trouble. But if you break out of the quarantine, then you pay us back, I think, 1,000 times that or something for our trouble.
I see. And so I'm very curious about this. The quarantine centers themselves. This is also something that I think is, something that Western countries used to do quite a lot. Would put the people, you move the people who need to be in quarantine to a centralized facility, and they quarantine there. And there may be some strange camaraderie that appears with, there's been romance novels written about, falling in love under quarantine and the rest of this as well. But, a society that's so atomized and individual, the individualistic, the idea of actually sort of going out of your house to sort of to spend this time with other people seems so strange. I wonder tell us a bit about the cultures of these places.
Sure. They're 4-star and 5-star hotels mostly that didn't have much international visitors anyway. And then repurposed into kind of a 14-day vacation place with sometimes with also, small gyms and exercising equipment. So I guess it felt like a vacation. And I'm not just kind of playing down that this suddenly have to leave the place you work and live for 14 days. I mean, this is quite traumatic for frankly speaking, a lot of people. But we try to make it something that's worth sharing afterwards. And that is to say, I remember when there was a quarantine center near the Yangming Mountain, and I received this email from someone quarantined there saying, Mister, you promised broadband as a human right, but on this room near the Yangming Mountain, I don't get broadband. This email took me 5 hours to write, to send, and my human right is being compromised. I cannot watch streaming video. And then I'm like, sorry, we apologize profusely, and within 14 days, we've installed a repeater there so they can enjoy streaming video. But by that time, that person is already out of quarantine. So he made a point of driving back, measuring speed test, posting on social media and things like that.
This very, very engaged citizen.
That's right.
All right. Cheers. And that was really good conversation. And I look forward to continue over email. And if you need anything, just let me know. And we plan to post the video that you edited under Creative Commons after you air, if that's okay with you. Okay. See you then. Live long and prosper.